This entry takes us to the year 2019, when the AEW Championship belt involving Chris Jericho was stolen. Chris Jericho, an experienced veteran of the wrestling world, made history on August 31st, 2019, when he became the inaugural AEW World Champion at the All Out pay-per-view event. Jericho defeated Hangman Adam Page in a match to claim the title, solidifying his place as the AEW's first ever World Champion. The AEW World Championship belt itself, designed by Dave Milliken, featured gold and silver plates on a black leather strap, estimated to be worth approximately $30K. However, what followed the night of his victory was far from expected, to say the least. What would follow was a bizarre chain of events, beginning with a seemingly routine drive to a steakhouse. On September 1st, the day after his title win, Chris Jericho arrived in Tallahassee, Florida. After landing at the Millionaire Club Airport Terminal, Jericho was picked up by a rented limousine. It was inside this limo where Jericho left his belt. The limo driver then proceeded to shuttle Jericho to a nearby Longhorn Steakhouse. After arriving at the restaurant, Jericho remained inside while the limo driver returned to the airport. The driver had discovered that Jericho had mistakenly taken the wrong luggage upon his arrival and took it back to the terminal for exchange. By all accounts, this was a somewhat normal task that should have posed no risk to the championship belt safely stored in the limo. However, upon the driver's return to the restaurant to pick up Jericho, the belt was gone. The exact details of how and when the theft occurred remain unclear, with no witnesses or clear evidence immediately available to explain the disappearance. What was certain was that the belt had vanished, sparking a mystery that left Jericho, AEW, and the Tallahassee Police Department scrambling for answers. The TPD took the report seriously, categorizing the incident as grand theft. The immediate response by the police involved gathering as much information as possible from Jericho, the limo driver, and any potential witnesses who might have seen suspicious activity in or around the Longhorn Steakhouse where the belt was last seen. The police report, which was partially redacted when released to the public, provided a basic outline of the timeline and events leading up to the theft. According to the report, Jericho had placed the championship belt in the limousine before entering the restaurant, and it was only after the driver returned from an errand that the belt was discovered missing. The investigation's initial focus was on retracing the steps of the limo driver and examining the areas where the vehicle had been during the critical time frame. The TPD also looked into the surveillance footage from the restaurant and surrounding businesses. However, details about whether any such footage was obtained or if it provided useful leads were not disclosed to the public. Just a few days after the belt was reported stolen, the TPD announced that the belt had been recovered. The circumstances of its recovery were almost as strange as its disappearance. According to reports, a local citizen found the championship belt lying on the side of the road and turned it into the police. This sudden and unexpected development brought relief to everyone, but it also raised more questions. The individual who found the belt, whose identity was not disclosed to the public, reportedly stumbled upon it by chance. The TPD confirmed that the belt was in good condition and thanked the citizen for their honesty and cooperation. The police department's statement did not provide specific details about the exact location where the belt was found or the condition it was in when it was discovered, which only fueled further speculation and curiosity. Despite the recovery of the belt, the TPD did not announce any arrests or identify any suspects. This led to speculation that the thief might have abandoned the belt after the immense coverage that the theft received. The possibility that the theft was an opportunistic crime committed by someone unaware of the belt's significance was also considered, but without concrete evidence, this remains speculative. Following the recovery of the belt, Chris Jericho and AEW wasted no time in shoehorning the incident into their ongoing storylines. Jericho framed the incident as part of his larger-than-life persona, declaring that he had personally overseen the successful recovery of his championship. AEW leveraged the media attention surrounding the theft to promote its brand and build anticipation for upcoming events. By weaving the real-life incident into its storylines, AEW reinforced the idea that anything can happen in professional wrestling, keeping fans engaged and entertained. The identity of Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, is one of the most compelling mysteries in the digital age. Bitcoin has made waves over the years and is being speculated on across the globe, yet the true identity of its creator remains unknown. Over the years, numerous theories and speculations have arisen, each attempting to unmask the person or group behind the Satoshi Nakamoto moniker. In October 2008, an individual or group using the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto published a white paper titled "Bitcoin, a Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash System." This document outlined the framework for a new type of digital currency that would operate without the need for a central authority, such as a bank or government. The paper proposed a decentralized system where transactions would be verified by network nodes through cryptography and recorded on a public ledger known as a blockchain. On January 3, 2009, Nakamoto mined the first block of the Bitcoin blockchain, known as the Genesis block. This block contained a cryptic message referencing a headline from the Times newspaper. The Times, January 3, 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. This message was widely interpreted as a critique of the traditional banking system and a statement of intent for Bitcoin to offer an alternative. For the first 2 years of Bitcoin's existence, Satoshi Nakamoto was actively involved in its development, communicating with other developers and the early Bitcoin community through online forums and emails. Nakamoto's language and writing style suggested a high level of technical expertise and a preference for British English, leading to speculation about their background. In April 2011, Nakamoto sent a final message to a fellow developer stating, "I've moved on to other things," and then vanished from public view. Since that time, there has been no verifiable communication from Nakamoto, and their substantial holdings of Bitcoin, estimated to be around 1 million coins, have remained untouched. The disappearance of Nakamoto has only deepened the mystery, with many questioning whether they were truly an individual or a group, and why they chose to remain anonymous despite the immense success of Bitcoin. Nakamoto's anonymity has become a fundamental aspect of Bitcoin's narrative and its appeal. By remaining unidentified, Nakamoto avoided becoming a central figure that could influence or control the direction of Bitcoin. This has allowed Bitcoin to maintain its decentralized ethos, free from the influence of any single person or entity. However, some argue that Nakamoto's anonymity could also pose risks. If Nakamoto were ever to be revealed, or if their vast Bitcoin holdings were to be moved, it could have significant implications for the crypto market. Numerous theories have been proposed regarding the true identity of Satoshi Nakamoto. These theories range from plausible candidates with relevant expertise to more outlandish ideas involving well-known figures from the tech world. One such individual is named Hal Finney. He is a computer scientist and an early contributor to Bitcoin, is one of the most credible candidates. Finney was the recipient of the first Bitcoin transaction sent by Nakamoto and was actively involved in debugging and improving Bitcoin's code. His expertise in cryptography and his libertarian leanings align closely with the principles behind Bitcoin. However, despite these connections, Finney consistently denied being Nakamoto, and there is no definitive evidence linking him to the pseudonym. Finney's death in 2014 further complicates the theory, as it would be impossible for him to continue managing Bitcoin's development or respond to new inquiries. Nick Szabo, a computer scientist and cryptographer, is another leading candidate. Szabo is known for his work on digital contracts and his development of BitGold, a precursor to Bitcoin that shares many similarities with it. Szabo's deep understanding of cryptography, economics, and decentralized systems makes him a strong contender, but similar to Finney, Szabo has repeatedly denied being Satoshi Nakamoto. Some theorists believe that Szabo may have chosen to distance himself from the pseudonym to avoid legal or financial complications. Australian computer scientist Craig Wright is one of the most controversial figures associated with the Nakamoto identity. In 2016, Wright publicly claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto, providing some technical evidence to support this. However, the cryptocurrency community largely dismissed his claims due to inconsistencies and a lack of irrefutable proof. Wright's claims have led to numerous legal battles and a significant amount of skepticism within the Bitcoin community. Many view him as a figure seeking attention rather than the true creator of Bitcoin. Several other figures have been suggested as potential candidates, including Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, and even the late Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. These theories are primarily speculative, often based on tenuous connections or coincidences, and lack substantial evidence. As I've mentioned toward the beginning, there is also a theory that Satoshi Nakamoto could be a group of people rather than an individual. This theory suggests that the vast knowledge required to create Bitcoin, spanning cryptography, economics, and software development, may have been beyond the capacity of a single person. Some speculate that Nakamoto's identity might be revealed accidentally or through legal proceedings, particularly if the Bitcoin holdings associated with Nakamoto are ever moved. Others believe that Nakamoto's anonymity is intentional and will be preserved indefinitely. Regardless of whether Nakamoto's identity is ever uncovered, the impact of their creation is undeniable. Bitcoin has fundamentally changed the way people think about money, privacy, and the role of central authorities in the financial system. This next entry takes place in Helsinki, Finland in August of 1976. Susanne Lindholm was a 23-year-old Finnish woman living in Helsinki at the time of her murder. She was described as attractive, athletic, and somewhat introverted. Susanne worked a modest job and led a relatively quiet life, with no known connections to any criminal activity or dangerous acquaintances. She spent the evening of August 7th, 1976 at the Hesperia Hotel nightclub. This nightclub was extremely popular and was regularly packed. This night was no different. Susanne was reportedly in good spirits, socializing with her friends and others. She was seen in the company of a Norwegian man in the club. According to some accounts, this man had been visiting Helsinki and had met Susanne earlier that evening. They spent time together at the club, dancing and talking, and witnesses later described their interactions as friendly, though not particularly intimate. The Norwegian man, who would later become a person of interest in the investigation, appeared to be enjoying the night as much as Susanne. As the evening progressed, Susanne and her companions continued to enjoy the atmosphere at the Hesperia. At some point during the night, Susanne decided to leave the club. The exact time she left is not definitively known, but it is believed to have been in the early hours of August 8th, possibly around 2 or 3 a.m. What remains unclear is how Susanne left the club and how she made her way home. No one saw Susanne leave the club, and there were no known witnesses who observed her journey home. This lack of eyewitnesses has led to much speculation about how Susanne returned to her apartment that night. Several theories have been proposed regarding how she got home. One possibility is that Susanne may have walked back, but this theory raises questions due to the distance between the nightclub and her apartment. Walking alone at that hour, especially for a young woman, might have been risky, and Susanne was known to be cautious about her personal safety. Another theory is that Susanne might have accepted a ride from someone she knew or even from a stranger. This theory aligns with the idea that she might have been accompanied by someone she trusted or someone who convinced her to accept a ride. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this theory, and it remains purely speculative. Taxi drivers operating in the area were questioned, but none could confirm having picked up Susanne that night. Given the late hour and the number of people leaving the nightclub, it's possible that she might have been picked up without the driver realizing her significance later on. However, the police were unable to find any solid leads from the taxi drivers. Another detail that is unclear is the time at which Susanne arrived at her apartment building, but what is clear is that she entered the building at some point during the night. Her apartment was located in a multi-story building on Mannerheimen-tie, a major road in Helsinki. The building itself was relatively secure with locked entrances that required a key for access. Susanne's movements within the apartment building are also unclear. It is presumed that she entered the building with her own key, as there were no signs of forced entry and her keys were later found in her possession. This suggests that she arrived home willingly and was not forced into the building by someone with ill intent. In addition, it's also strange why Susanne went to the basement of the building where her body was later found. The basement was accessible only with a key, and it was not a common area that residents would visit late at night. Some have speculated that Susanne might have been lured or coerced into the basement by someone she knew. Susanne's body was discovered with multiple stab wounds. The nature of the wounds suggested a frenzied, possibly premeditated assault. There were also signs of a struggle, as evidenced by the defensive wounds on Susanne's hands and the presence of skin under her fingernails, which indicated that she fought back against her attacker. The positioning of her body and other details of the crime scene have led to various interpretations. Some investigators believe that Susanne might have been overpowered by a strong assailant who knew her or who had followed her home. The absence of any signs of forced entry into the building or the basement further suggests that Susanne might have trusted the person she encountered, or that the person had access to the building. Investigators believe that the attack was carried out shortly after Susanne entered the basement. The lack of noise or disturbance reported by other residents suggests that the attack was swift and that the assailant left the scene quickly. However, no one reported seeing any suspicious activity in the building that night, leaving investigators with few leads. One of the most perplexing aspects of the case is the location where Susanne's body was found. The building's caretaker, making his rounds early in the day, was the one who found her body in the basement. One of the earliest theories proposed by investigators was that Susanne's murder was the result of a robbery gone wrong. This theory was based on the fact that 2 gold rings and a purse were missing from Susanne at the time her body was found. It seemed plausible that the killer's initial intent was to rob her, but the situation escalated, leading to her murder. However, this theory has several weaknesses. Firstly, the level of violence involved in the murder appeared excessive for a simple robbery. Susanne was found with multiple stab wounds, indicating a degree of rage or personal animosity that would be unusual in a mere robbery. Secondly, the items stolen were of relatively low value, which suggests that robbery might not have been the primary motive. Additionally, the thoroughness of the search and lack of disarray in the apartment could imply that the robbery was staged after the murder to mislead investigators. As the investigation progressed, the robbery theory was gradually abandoned, especially as other motives seemed more plausible given the nature of the crime. The nature of Susanne's injuries led some to speculate that her murder was a crime of passion, committed by someone who knew her personally and was driven by intense emotions such as jealousy, anger, or revenge. Crimes of passion often involve a level of violence that exceeds what is necessary to kill, which aligns with the multiple stab wounds inflicted on Susanne. Supporters of this theory point out that Susanne was young, attractive, and known to have attracted attention from men, both wanted and unwanted. It's possible that she had a secret relationship or was the object of unreciprocated love, which led someone to commit the murder in a fit of rage when their feelings were not returned or if they were spurned. The fact that the crime took place in her own apartment building further suggests that the perpetrator might have been someone who had intimate knowledge of her life and habits. However, this theory faces challenges due to the lack of any clear evidence linking Susanne to a potential suspect who could fit this profile. Despite extensive interviews with her friends, family, and acquaintances, no one was identified who had both the motive and the opportunity to commit the crime. Another theory that has gained traction over the years is that Susanne was the victim of a serial killer. This theory was first considered after investigators noticed similarities between Susanne's murder and other unsolved murders in Helsinki around the same time. Specifically, the unsolved murders of Seija Tuulikki-Kekkonen in December 1980 and Helka Onerva Katola in January 1981 have been compared to Susanne's case. Both victims were women who lived alone and were found murdered under suspicious circumstances. The level of violence in these cases and the lack of clear motive have led some to believe that a single individual might be responsible for all 3 murders. Proponents of the serial killer theory argue that the pattern of these murders, targeting women living alone, the brutal nature of the attacks, and the fact that they remain unsolved, points to a possible serial offender. The lack of evidence linking these crimes to any known individuals further supports the idea that they could be the work of a single, unidentified perpetrator who was careful not to leave behind incriminating evidence. However, critics of this theory note that the time gaps between the murders could suggest otherwise. Serial killers often follow a more consistent pattern in terms of timing and method, and the differences in the locations and circumstances of the crimes might indicate that these were isolated incidents rather than the work of one individual. The case has been reopened several times over the years, particularly as forensic technology has advanced. In 2004, a new investigation was launched and the evidence was re-examined using modern DNA analysis techniques. Despite these efforts, no new suspects were identified and the case remains unsolved. Our first entry takes us over to San Francisco south of Market District on June 2nd, 1985. A passerby stumbled upon the lifeless body of a young man lying face down near the intersection of 11th and Bryant Streets. Upon arriving at the scene, law enforcement officers were immediately struck by just how brutal the crime was. The victim was a young Caucasian male. He had no form of identification on him, so he was designated as John Doe 60. He was estimated to be in his late teens or early 20s, standing approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing around 130 pounds. His light brown hair and blue eyes suggested Northern European ancestry, yet nothing about his appearance or the circumstances provided a clear path to determining his identity. The initial examination of the body revealed a gunshot wound to the head. However, the discovery of numerous other injuries suggested that this was not a simple murder. The young man's hands were bound tightly behind his back with guitar strings, indicating a degree of premeditation and a desire to inflict suffering. Adding to the horror, the victim's body bore signs of severe torture and mutilation. Several deep slashes were found on his chest and neck. The chest wounds were particularly disturbing as they formed an upside-down pentagram, which led some to believe that this man was involved in some sort of satanic ritual. Additionally, burn marks were on the neck and candle wax had been poured into the victim's right eye. These details suggested not just a murder, but a ritualistic killing, or an act to send some type of message. The crime scene itself presented several challenges to investigators. The Soma district in 1985 was a district undergoing change, with many of its older buildings being repurposed or left abandoned. Additionally, during the night, many transients were out and about. This environment provided ample opportunities for crimes to occur without immediate detection, and the area's mix of people made it difficult to pinpoint a suspect or motive based solely on location. Forensic analysis at the scene was complicated by the lack of obvious clues. Again, no identification was found on the body, and there were no personal belongings nearby that could give hints about the victim's identity or background. This led investigators to consider several possibilities. The victim could have been homeless or transient. His identity might have been deliberately obscured by the killer, or he could have been targeted by someone who knew him personally. The unusual nature of the victim's injuries also posed significant questions. During the 1980s, the United States was in the middle of the Satanic Panic, a period marked by widespread fear of occult activities and ritualistic murders. The presence of these symbols led some investigators to theorize that the murder could be connected to a satanic cult operating in the area. However, despite the sensational elements of the case, experienced officials were cautious about jumping to conclusions. They recognized that the pentagram and other signs could have been staged to mislead investigators, either to throw them off the trail of a more mundane motive or to exploit the public's fear of the occult. This possibility further complicated the investigation as it required detectives to consider both the symbolic and practical aspects of the crime. Fast forward to 1987, the case took an interesting turn. By this time, the case had grown cold with few leads and no substantial progress. However, the sudden involvement of a man named Maurice Bourque brought new life and controversy to the case. Born in Canada, Bourque had a long history of criminal activity, including theft, fraud, and violent crimes. He had managed to escape from a Canadian prison in the early 1980s and had since been living in the United States under various aliases. Bourque's life on the run led him into the underbelly of society, where he frequently interacted with other criminals and outcasts. By 1987, Bourque was serving time in a US prison for kidnapping and robbery. He was known to be manipulative and cunning, often seeking ways to reduce his sentences by offering information to authorities. It was under these circumstances that he made a startling claim. He knew the identity of John Doe 60's killer, and the person responsible was his former lover, Clifford St. Joseph. Bourque's testimony was definitely interesting, but it was also deeply problematic. Bourque painted a picture of Clifford as a man with a dark side, someone capable of extreme violence and manipulation. He was openly gay and had a history of taking in misfits and runaways. Bourque claimed that Clifford had killed the young man in a fit of rage and, in an effort to cover up the crime, had staged the body to make it look like a satanic ritual. This account provided a potential breakthrough in the case. However, there were significant issues with Bourque's credibility. Given his criminal history and the possibility that he was offering information in exchange for leniency in his own legal troubles, law enforcement was cautious about taking his claims at face value. value. Moreover, Bork's relationship with Clifford added another layer of complexity. The two men had been lovers, and their relationship was reportedly tumultuous. This raised questions about Bork's motives. Was he telling the truth, or was he seeking revenge against an ex-lover? Clifford St. Joseph was no stranger to the law, but his previous run-ins with the authorities were not as severe as Bork's. He had a misdemeanor conviction for check fraud and a statutory rape charge stemming from an incident when he was a teenager. Despite these legal issues, St. Joseph was known in his community as someone who opened his home to people who had nowhere else to go. He created a space where they could find some semblance of safety. However, this altruism was accompanied by rumors and suspicions. Some who knew Clifford described him as a complex individual with a troubled past. His open-door policy for those in need also meant that he associated with a wide range of individuals, some of whom were involved in criminal activities. Of course, Clifford denied any involvement in the murder of John Doe 60. He claimed that Bork was lying, motivated by bitterness over their failed relationship and a desire to improve his own situation in prison. His legal team argued that there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime and that Bork's testimony was unreliable, given his history of deceit and manipulation. Ultimately, Clifford St. Joseph was brought to trial. Despite the defense's efforts, he was convicted of the murder of John Doe 60, largely on the strength of Morris Bork's testimony. The verdict was controversial, with many observers questioning whether justice had truly been served. The conviction relied heavily on the word of a known criminal, and there were lingering doubts about whether the full truth had been uncovered. In the years since the trial, advances in forensic science prompted some to re-examine the case of John Doe 60 and the conviction of Clifford St. Joseph. DNA testing, which was not available at the time of the original investigation, has become a powerful tool in solving cold cases. There have been calls to reopen the case and apply modern forensic techniques to the evidence, in the hope of either confirming Clifford's guilt or exonerating him. While officially a name for the killer has been found, many believe that Clifford was falsely accused, and to this day, we still have no idea as to who John Doe 60 really was. The Shugborough inscription is a cryptic sequence of letters carved into the Shepherd's Monument at Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire, England. The letters have since stumped historians, cryptographers, and conspiracy theorists for over 2 centuries. Shugborough Hall, the ancestral home of the Anson family, was transformed in the 18th century into a grand estate, with various architectural features and monuments added to the grounds. Among these is the Shepherd's Monument. The monument was inspired by Poussin's The Shepherds of Arcadia. However, it is the inscription beneath that has drawn the most attention. The letters DOUOSVAVVM are carved into stone and have been the subject of much debate and curiosity. The inscription does not appear in historical records until the 19th century, raising questions about whether it was part of the original design or added later. Theories range from religious and esoteric interpretations to romantic dedications, cryptographic solutions, and even the possibility that it was intended as a hoax. One of the most common interpretations of the inscription is its possible connection to religious or esoteric traditions. This theory posits that the inscription may be a coded reference to specific religious texts or symbols, potentially connected to secretive organizations like the Knights Templar or the Freemasons. A popular belief, particularly fueled by the modern fascination with secret societies and conspiracy theories, is that the inscription is related to the Knights Templar and the legend of the Holy Grail. Proponents of this theory suggest that the letters encode a secret message that could lead to the location of the Holy Grail or other religious relics. Supporters often cite the connection between Nicolas Poussin's painting Et in Arcadia Ego, depicted on the monument, and the Templar myths. The painting, which shows shepherds contemplating a tomb, is seen by some as symbolizing the secret knowledge of the Templars, particularly their supposed guardianship of the Grail. The idea that the inscription might be a key to unlocking this secret has made it a focal point for those who believe in hidden histories and the mystery of the Templars. The story of the lost Thunderbird photo centers around a supposed photograph of a giant bird or pterosaur-like creature nailed to a barn and surrounded by cowboys or soldiers. Despite numerous claims of having seen the photograph and extensive searches, no concrete evidence of its existence has ever been found. The Thunderbird is a creature from Native American folklore, particularly among tribes in the Pacific Northwest. Described as a massive bird with the power to create thunder and lightning, the Thunderbird is a symbol of strength and power in these cultures. This story, however, is believed to have originated from a newspaper article published in the Tombstone Epitaph on April 26, 1890. The article described a strange winged monster that was supposedly killed by two ranchers in the Arizona desert. The creature was said to have an enormous wingspan resembling that of a pterosaur, and was taken to the town of Tombstone where it was photographed. Over time, the story of the Thunderbird photo began to take on a life of its own. This image, often described as showing a bird with an enormous wingspan pinned to a wall, became ingrained in the collective memory of cryptozoology enthusiasts. Many people claim to have seen this photograph, often recalling it from old books, magazines, or even documentaries. However, despite these widespread claims, no one has ever been able to produce a copy of the photograph or even a credible reference to it in any reliable publication. Numerous attempts have been made to locate the lost Thunderbird photo. In the 1960s, the staff of the Tombstone Epitaph itself conducted a search of their archives to find the photograph, but they came up empty-handed. The newspaper confirmed that no such photograph had ever been published, and there was no record of it in their archives. Further searches were conducted by amateur sleuths and cryptozoologists who scoured old newspapers, books, and magazines for any trace of the photograph. Despite these efforts, no verifiable evidence of the photo has been found. Some researchers have suggested that the photo may have been published in a now lost issue of a newspaper or magazine, while others believe that it never existed in the first place. One of the most commonly accepted explanations is that the Thunderbird photo is a case of false memory. This phenomenon occurs when people remember something that never actually happened, often due to the blending of different memories or the influence of suggestion. In this case, the vivid descriptions of the photo and the repeated telling of the story may have led people to believe they had seen it when they had not. Another possibility is that the lost Thunderbird photo is a misidentified or exaggerated memory of a real photograph. Some suggest that people may have confused the image with other photos of large birds or similar creatures. There is also the possibility that the photo did exist at one point but has since been lost or destroyed. Old newspapers and photographs were often not well preserved, and it is possible that a real photograph could have been lost over time. However, the lack of any credible reference to the photo in contemporary sources makes this theory less likely. Some believe that the story of the Thunderbird photo may have originated as a hoax or tall tale. The story could have been embellished over time, leading to the widespread belief in the existence of the photo. Panspermia proposes that life exists throughout the universe, distributed by meteoroids, asteroids, comets, and even artificial means, such as spacecraft from advanced civilizations. This theory challenges the more widely accepted notion that life began independently on Earth through chemical processes. Panspermia shifts the origin of life from Earth to a broader cosmic context, raising fundamental questions about our understanding of life and its potential prevalence across the universe. The idea of panspermia dates back to ancient Greece, with philosophers like Anaxagoras suggesting that life is distributed throughout the cosmos. However, the modern scientific framework for panspermia was developed in the 19th and early 20th centuries. In the late 1800s, scientists like Hermann von Helmholtz and Svante Arrhenius proposed that microscopic life could travel through space, carried by radiation pressure or embedded within meteoroids, to start life on different planets. Arrhenius in particular popularized the idea of radiopanspermia, where spores or bacteria could be propelled through space by light pressure. Despite initial interest, the theory was largely overshadowed by the growing acceptance of Darwinian evolution and the chemical origins of life on Earth. However, the discovery of extremophiles, organisms that can survive extreme conditions, revived interest in the panspermia hypothesis, suggesting that life could indeed survive the harsh conditions of space travel. The scientific community has approached panspermia with both skepticism and curiosity. While definite proof is lacking, there are pieces of evidence that could be used to support the hypothesis. For example, meteorites, particularly carbonaceous chondrites, which have been found to contain a rich array of organic compounds, including amino acids, which are the building blocks of life. The famous Murchison meteorite, which fell in Australia in 1969, contained over 90 different amino acids, many of which are not found naturally on Earth. This discovery suggested that the building blocks of life might be widespread in the cosmos. Moreover, certain meteorites have been found to contain structures that resemble fossilized microorganisms. One of the most famous examples is the Martian meteorite ALH 84001, which was initially thought to contain evidence of ancient microbial life from Mars. Although this idea has been heavily debated and is not widely accepted as conclusive evidence of extraterrestrial life, it has kept the possibility of panspermia alive in scientific discussions. Furthermore, experiments have demonstrated that some microorganisms can survive the harsh conditions of space at least for limited periods. For instance, the European Space Agency's Expose-E mission on the International Space Station tested the survival of various microorganisms in space. Some, like Deinococcus radiodurans, showed remarkable resilience, surviving exposure to vacuum, intense radiation, and extreme temperatures. These findings suggest that if microorganisms were ejected from a planet like Mars or Earth, they could potentially survive a journey through space, at least within the relatively protected environment of a rock or a meteorite. The Great Sphinx of Giza is one of the most iconic monuments in human history. Among its many features, the missing nose of the Sphinx has sparked numerous theories and debates over the centuries. The Great Sphinx is believed to have been constructed during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre in the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Standing on the Giza Plateau, it was carved directly from the limestone bedrock, making it one of the largest and oldest monumental statues in the world. The Sphinx is 240 feet long and 66 feet high, with its head representing a pharaoh, likely Khafre himself, and its body symbolizing strength and courage through its depiction as a lion. Historical records indicate that the nose was missing long before modern times, as sketches from as early as the 18th century depict the Sphinx without its nose. This has led to a multitude of theories attempting to explain what happened to this prominent facial feature. One of the most persistent and popular myths surrounding the Sphinx's missing nose is that it was destroyed by the French army during Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign in Egypt in 1798. The story goes that Napoleon's soldiers used the Sphinx for target practice and accidentally shot off its nose. This narrative, however, has been widely debunked. Sketches made by the Danish naval captain Frederick Louis Norden in 1737, which were published in 1755, clearly show the Sphinx without its nose, decades before Napoleon's arrival in Egypt. Moreover, historical records from the time of Napoleon's expedition indicate that he and his scholars were fascinated by Egypt's ancient monuments. They even conducted detailed studies and documented many of the archaeological sites. It seems unlikely that they would have vandalized such a significant monument, contradicting the idea that Napoleon's troops were responsible. Another more historically supported theory suggests that the nose was destroyed in the 14th century by a Sufi Muslim named Muhammad Sa'im al-Dar. According to the Egyptian historian al-Makrizi, Sa'im al-Dar was outraged by the local Egyptian peasants who offered sacrifices to the Sphinx, believing it could influence the Nile floods and ensure a successful harvest. In a fit of religious zeal, Sa'im al-Dar is said to have defaced the Sphinx, damaging its nose as an act of protest against what he saw as idolatry. This account, while plausible, still leaves room for debate. While al-Makrizi's narrative is one of the earliest references to the Sphinx's missing nose, some historians question its accuracy and suggest that this may be a case of retroactive explanation, a story created to fit the observable fact that the nose was missing. Another theory posits that the nose may have been lost due to natural causes. The Sphinx has been exposed to the elements for millennia, and erosion from wind, sand, and changes in temperature could have caused the nose, which may have been structurally weaker than other parts of the statue, to eventually break off. The nose, being a protruding feature, would have been particularly susceptible to these forces. This theory is supported by the fact that other parts of the Sphinx have also suffered significant erosion over the centuries. However, the nature of the breakage does not fully support this theory. The clean cut observed on the Sphinx's face where the nose used to be suggests that it may have been intentionally removed rather than gradually worn away by natural forces. Some historians speculate that the Sphinx's nose might have been intentionally destroyed by invaders who occupied Egypt at various times throughout its history. This could include the Mamluks, who ruled Egypt from the 13th to the 16th centuries, or the Turks during the Ottoman Empire. These groups, motivated by either religious reasons or simple disregard for the monuments of a previous civilization, might have defaced the Sphinx. There is, however, limited direct evidence to support this theory. The hum is a phenomenon characterized by a persistent, low-frequency noise that has been reported across the globe. The sound, often described as a droning, humming, or rumbling noise, is particularly unusual because it is only audible to a small percentage of the population, estimated to be between 2% and 4% in affected areas. Despite numerous reports and investigations, the source of the hum remains largely unidentified, leading to many theories ranging from industrial machinery to psychological phenomena. Reports of mysterious humming noises date back several decades, with some of the earliest documented cases occurring in 1970. One of the most famous early instances is the Bristol hum in the United Kingdom, where residents of Bristol complained of a constant low-frequency noise that was particularly noticeable at night. Despite extensive investigations, no definitive source was found. Similar reports began to emerge from other parts of the world, including the Taos hum in New Mexico, the Kokomo hum in Indiana, and the Windsor hum in Ontario, Canada. Each of these cases has its unique characteristics, but they all share the common feature of being heard by only a small fraction of the local population, leading to widespread frustration and curiosity. Numerous theories have been proposed to explain the hum, ranging from mundane to more speculative ideas. One of the most straightforward explanations for the hum is that it is caused by industrial activity such as the operation of heavy machinery, power lines, or gas pipelines. This theory is supported by cases like the Windsor hum, where researchers suggested that the noise might originate from a blast furnace at a U.S. steel facility on Zug Island. Similarly, in Kokomo, Indiana, investigations link the noise to cooling towers and air compressors at local factories. However, this explanation does not account for all instances of the hum. For example, in Taos, New Mexico, extensive investigations by local and federal authorities failed to identify any industrial source that could explain the noise. Additionally, the hum has been reported in rural areas with little to no industrial activity, suggesting that other factors may be involved. Another theory posits that the hum may be related to low-frequency seismic activity or microseisms, which are small, continuous vibrations of the Earth's surface. These vibrations could, under certain conditions, produce sounds that are audible to some people. This explanation aligns with the fact that the hum is often reported in areas with significant geological activity, such as Taos, which is near the Rio Grande Rift, a region with a history of seismic activity. However, the lack of consistent seismic data to correlate with reports of the hum makes this theory difficult to prove. Given that only a small percentage of people can hear the hum, some researchers have proposed that it may be a psychological or perceptual phenomenon. This theory suggests that individuals who hear the hum may have heightened sensitivity to low-frequency sounds, or that the noise may be a form of auditory hallucination related to conditions like tinnitus. While this explanation could account for the variability in reports and the difficulty in measuring the hum, it does not fully explain why the phenomenon is often localized to specific areas or why it can be so distressing to those who hear it. On June 28, 1997, a dismembered female torso was discovered in a wooded area of Hempstead Lake State Park in Lakeview, New York. The remains were found in a Rubbermaid container along with a red towel and a floral pillowcase. The victim, referred to as Peaches due to a distinctive tattoo of a heart-shaped peach on her left breast, was estimated to have died around June 25, 1997. Her head, both arms, and legs below the knee were severed and initially not recovered. The tattoo led investigators to Steve Cullen, a tattoo artist in Connecticut, who remembered giving the tattoo to a young black woman, approximately 18 or 19 years old, who was accompanied by her aunt and cousin. She mentioned being from either the Bronx or Long Island. The link between Peaches and the Long Island serial killer case emerged over a decade later when additional remains were found at Jones Beach State Park. The discovery of her skeletal remains, along with the remains of a toddler identified as her daughter, deepened the mystery. This connection to the Long Island case suggested that Peaches might have been one of the early victims of a serial killer who targeted vulnerable women, often sex workers, and disposed of their bodies along the shores of Long Island. The use of genetic genealogy has become an increasingly important tool in solving cold cases. By tracing DNA through family trees, investigators hope to identify Peaches by connecting her DNA to living relatives. The 2022 appeal by the Mobile Police Department in Alabama to find relatives of Elijah Howell suggests that there may be a familial link worth exploring. This approach has been successful in other cases, such as the identification of the Golden State Killer, and offers hope for resolving Peaches' case. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, Japan was undergoing significant social and economic changes. The rapid urbanization and industrial growth led to increased migration to urban centers like Tokyo, resulting in a bustling metropolis with a diverse population. During this time, a series of violent crimes began to unfold, targeting young women living alone in the city. The perpetrator of the Tokyo Metropolitan murders had a distinct and disturbing modus operandi. The victims, mostly women in their 20s, were attacked, typically around midnight. The assailant would sexually assault the victims before murdering them and setting their bodies on fire. This pattern of assault and arson was consistent across the cases. The killer often climbed into the victims' homes using a ladder, indicating a level of premeditation and familiarity with the areas. The assailant's blood type was believed to be O, which would become a key detail in the investigation. In 1974, Etsuo Ono, a 37-year-old construction worker with a criminal past, was arrested on suspicion of theft due to his history of similar crimes, including burglary and arson, and his blood type matching that of the suspected killer. Ono became a person of interest in the investigation. However, the evidence against him was largely circumstantial, and he was not charged with the majority of the murders. He had spent 13 years in prison for various offenses, including theft and causing bodily harm. His familiarity with the areas where the murders occurred, coupled with his known use of ladders to commit crimes, aligned with the profile of the killer. Ono was linked to several crimes during the investigation, including the murder and of a 26-year-old woman in Adachi in 1968. However, the lack of direct evidence meant that he could not be definitively tied to the series of murders. Ono would ultimately serve time for that single murder I mentioned, but there is much debate on whether or not he was coerced into a confession.